Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And what we're doing here is we're attempting to add Alan Watt to the call via Skype calling, and it's just not working, possibly because AFR, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have to do some producing on air because we're having some technical difficulties with the line, and we've got to somehow get Alan connected. He didn't want to call in because it's a toll call. We can't call him because the caller line's fracked. So what I'm trying to do now is call him on the Skype. Find a solution. You know, that's what you do, ladies and gentlemen. So AFR, if you're on the phone with him right now, trying to convince him to come on and everything like that, just like hang up or add him onto the Skype call if it's at all possible. That would be quite nice. I'm trying to bring him in through the Skype now. Still not working. Okay, well, it's spent 2 years trying to contact Alan Watt and have him finally get back to me. And now I can't do it. You gotta be freaking kidding me. You know, this happens, ladies and gentlemen, where you build something up, you promote it all over the place, and then at the last minute, something devilish and nasty comes in and snatches all your hard work and fate away from you. You all know what that's like, don't you? Of course you do, because you're a slave to the New World Order, just like me. People think that as soon as you're a radio host or fighting against the New World Order that you're suddenly not a slave to it. I'm sorry, at all times, at no point in your life have you actually ever really been truly 100% free. Okay? Even if you've had successes in court and so on and so forth, exposed in scumbaggery, there is no true freedom. Not currently. It is possible to bring it back if it ever existed in the first place. Alan should be calling us in now, so if you're on the line there, Alan, speak up. But I don't think he is. He hasn't called in yet. It's quite actually frustrating, man. Yeah, I'm really disappointed about this. And I apologise, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who tuned in expecting to hear Alan Watt, and all you hear is me just going, what the heck is going on? You know what I'm saying? It's a terrible situation. The difficulty. And dealing with difficulty. You know, normally, I think it's good to get your frustrations out. You know, I tend to... if it's in private, not around people or what have you, and something goes terribly wrong, I just kind of let loose, you know, the yelling, the screaming, the extremely, really out of control kind of Vinnie Eastwood, you know, and it's like that for a minute or two, and then all the anger's gone, it's like, back to normal, peaceful and serene. Okay, I've got to figure out something here. I should be trying to... What are we going to talk about with Alan Watt? Well, what do you speak about with Alan Watt? You know? You're talking about a man with immense knowledge in many, many ways. In a wide variety of subjects. Intense knowledge of the elite. AFR, if you click the add person or add people to the call, and then you type in Alan's number with the +1, the area code, that should actually be able to bring him into the Skype call, I think. I hope. One of the topics that was of particular interest to me regarding Alan Watt was his knowledge of Illuminati breeding programs. I'm just going to dial that little number in there. You know, why is it that when you're a conspiracy theorist, everything starts to make you think that there's some kind of conspiracy, right? You know, the Skype drops out or some kind of technical issue comes up. Automatically, people assume it's the New World Order. It's the New World Order. Instead of their own incompetence. and their own technical malfunctions. That's yeah.
Sir.
Huh? We got him on the line?
Yes, sir, we do.
Can you hear me? Alan, what? No? I can't hear him. We've been told now that Alan is on the line, but I can't hear him. Unless, of course, I'm supposed to unmute him with my little unmutable wackadoo thingy here. Hold on 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Man, this sounds like a remarkably unprofessional broadcast. An absolutely unprofessional broadcast. And, yeah. I think even when things aren't your fault, it's a good idea to just take responsibility for them and find a solution. You know what I'm saying? And this thing won't log in. Okay. That's great. All right. So let me see if we can list the technical malfunctions on the show so far today, ladies and gentlemen. So, firstly, our caller line, for which we call people and then have them on the radio show, is messing up. So we can't call Alan. And then secondly, the Skype won't call him. It won't add him to the call. Doesn't matter what you do with the combination of numbers or anything like that. And then thirdly, Alan actually does call in, but you can't actually log in. For some reason, it won't even allow you to click the button, log in, to the conference room. Okay? Oh, Alan, we've heard you.
You got me? Yeah.
Oh, we've got you.
Okay.
It is remarkably wonderful and absolutely fabulous to hear your voice at last. We've lost 10 minutes of airtime already, and I was about to pop my eyeballs out of my skull with frustration.
Bell kept saying you were busy. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for being here in the first place. And my first question is, what is your website so that people can go and view your material? And the second question is, could you actually give us a bit of a background about, from you growing up, how you got into these various fields of research for which you're so noted for today?
Yes. The website is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And on that site, you'll see all of the other sites I have listed, including Alan Watt Sentinel.eu. But I got into it very early on because growing up in Britain during the time I grew up, I could sense there were massive changes. I could sense that there was mass unemployment, I think, since World War II, probably, right maybe to the present. But in the working class areas, I wondered why everyone was fighting about basic money for rent and things like that. Because you've grown with your pals around the different houses, their mums and dads, and everyone was kind of tense, stressed out. And I realized something was vastly wrong with this system of something we're getting taught at school was called Great Britain, that fought all these wars and got a massive empire, and yet across the country, and that was England, Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland, and Wales as well. People were on almost fixed incomes, and it really was a fixed type of system, a rigged system on how much can you pay the average person just to sustain them and no more. By the way, we're going back into that's austerity. But it was a rigged system. And then I found out at school that the history I was being taught there did not tally up with the history that I could find in the big archives and the big libraries around me. So I used to go, I had passes to get in. So I did awfully well in school. So I got adult passes even at the age of 5 and 6, you know. And so I got into the old books. Many of them, by the way, went back to the 1700s, even old newspapers from the 1800s. And the versions were given, even about Scotland, were completely different of the modern histories. And I realized early on, when I caught on to sociology, basically, and the writings of big players who attended world meetings to do with cultural organizations and the future that we're having. Lots of world conferences. When you read the books of Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells even, who was a propagandist for this organization, it really was at the top at that time, then I realized that they wanted a planned society, and that's what we had, a planned society. So most folk live in a little bubble, and Huxley said this too, and we do. We grew up in a little bubble. Every age group is catered to right through your life. They know exactly what you want at 5, what you want at 10 or 15, and the sexual changes too, and libido, how to use it, how to keep years of your life wasted in a sense, as you just go around and just be a good consumer and producer and a good taxpayer. And that's what it boiled down to, planned by big forces that were way above anything you'd ever be taught at school. And eventually, of course, I got into much, much deeper stuff, and I read as many books as I could, and I found out that, sure enough, they had a big world agenda. They always had it. It was on the go before I was born, and you can find the old organizations that became, for instance, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the American branch, and other branches are called Council on Foreign Relations. You found that they were descended from the Alfred Milner group, Lord Alfred Milner, and Cecil Rhodes, who was his partner and co-founder, and along with Lord Rothschild at that time. They founded what they were going to do with an empire, create an empire from Britain, grab the world's resources for themselves. They brought in the top eugenicists of their day, the early 20th century. And they even back then, by the way, they had already decided that we would have a post-industrial era, and they would farm out a lot of the work to different countries where the labor was cheap, and therefore they'd have mass unemployment down the road. What to do with the people? They worked out in think tanks because they own hundreds and hundreds of think tanks working on special areas of society to advise all governments now across the world. And they said they had to bring in world wars, eliminate cultures, most cultures, and eventually create some form of new culture for the general masses of population. So this was all worked out, but they needed world wars to make it happen. So World War I, which no one can make any sense of, really, such a massive war over an archduke getting assassinated, it wasn't that at all. But they wanted that war, and you found out you had young Turks involved, you had young Italians involved. These were all revolutionary movements that were started up and funded by a group in London, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Rhodes Foundation, to get the young to rebel within their own countries to bring in something called democracy. Now, democracy is a very elastic term, and it's never got a fixed definition, by the way. It never will have. It's a front, but revolutions are awfully necessary to get all this going. And after World War I, and during World War I, they set up the League of Nations as a form, an embryo for a world government, with its own World Health Organization and everything for world vaccinations, all these things, and even a food distribution system, which we still have in the Ministry of Agriculture for the United Nations. But it wasn't enough. And H.G. Wells, who was a propagandist, a paid propagandist, by the way, for this organization, has got lots of non-fiction books out there who believed in eugenics and the proles, you might say, the proletariat. He said after World War I, in one of his own books, just before he died, he says, we need another world war. The people haven't given up their sovereignty to the global natural elite who have the right to lead the world. So we need another war, he said. So we got one. And out of that came the United Nations. And during all the propaganda documentaries that put out by Path News and many, many other shows that put out for cinema at that time and radio, that's the first time people kept hearing about the United Nations are moving against the Axis powers and so on. And after that, of course, it becomes more and more common. But grabbing the world's resources, even from the days of Cecil Rhodes, was a primary goal. That's why he took over South Africa. And then he got the British government involved as an excuse to troop it and police it. And then the taxpayers of Britain ended up paying for all the railroad lines across there. They already did the same with India. The taxpayers fund all these wars so that the elite who lived at that time in London could become incredibly wealthy and have more further wars for grabbing world resources. We're still going through the resource wars today, by the way, right across the Middle East, which were planned, at least published in the 90s, by the Project for New American Century group.
Indeed.
So,
and the
everything. And
Well, Alan, we're coming to break now. I just wanted to say as well to those who might be a little bit unfamiliar with the Council on Foreign Relations and it was a project for the New American Century we were talking about. They wanted a new Pearl Harbor, and they got it on 9/11. Alan Watt is my guest. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the show that recognises that things are just a little bit bonkers. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting live on American Freedom Radio. From the fabulously fluoridated and Fukushima-irradiated island-chained nation paradise of New Zealand, where the rad level is so high that everybody now no longer suffers from an economic crisis because of a special part-time job they all have as an incandescent light bulb. And my very special guest is Alan Watt, the illustrious, the famous, from cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Now, one of these perspectives I often miss out on, Alan, is speaking to the elders who have not only seen a lot through their life, but elders like yourself that have actually been aware throughout the entirety of that life. I've met some people who are only just woken up like about 3-4 years ago, and they're pushing 50, and I look at you and I see an entire lifetime of accumulated awareness and knowledge, and I think this is part of the reason why your radio show and the subjects that you talk about and the way that you talk about them is, in fact, so compelling. And if you wouldn't mind, just please continue.
Yeah, you've got to have some background and being aware of the changes that they were living through. And I questioned everything. I can remember when I was really small, started toddling around, and miniskirts came in, for instance, something like miniskirts. And the BBC, I think it was the only station we had back then, one station, was promoting it on top of the pops and things like that. And they would interview the sudden rock stars that came out of nowhere, the pop stars. And they'd interview these guys falling off chairs, really stoned out their heads. Now, this was at the time, too, when you had Timothy O'Leary going around pushing the drugs, and even Aldous Huxley with his Doors of Perception, all aimed at teenagers to try the drugs out. Lots of articles just bust out in the mainstream newspaper, which is all controlled, again, by members of the Royal Institute for International Affairs or Council on Foreign Relations. They own the cartels, still do. And so I thought, well, why would the establishment at the top and people on the BBC with Oxford voices, because that's all they employed at that time, by the way, it was only people from Oxford. You had to get that to get into the BBC or get a job. Why were they promoting what seemed to be the disruption of the culture and society? And I had to dig deeper, and I went back into the Roaring '20s, where the same thing had been tried before, where they brought in the miniskirts. They got the booze cans to be a very naughty things to get into for youngsters with prohibition. We've found that big families like the Bronfmans in Canada, for instance, ran the booze industry. I mean, they're so wealthy, they even had a cruiser that went from Canada with the booze to Cuba, then into the States. And this is all allowed. You can't get away with this sort of crime, obviously, without permission from a top gang of somebody's. And then so I watched the fallout as I was growing up. Naturally, girls got pregnant. In the 20s, of course, they got pregnant too. They didn't have abortionists. They had to pay for their abortions. The orphanages got stuffed with their children, unwanted children. And they didn't have antibiotics to kill off the venereal disease they promoted with the Charleston dance and all the music they were shoving out. And so they put it on the back burner, put our tax money, by the way, back into scientific research to come out with the pill just in time when they reintroduced the whole system in the 60s. Same system, by the way, exactly the same system. And if you go back into the 1920s, early 20s, you'll find H.G. Wells talking about that, how to make society more promiscuous, to dissolve marriage altogether, which would dissolve the old cultures, to make people more pliable, more easily managed, and more easily directed into the new. Once a culture, you see, we're kind of like sheep or cattle grazing in a field. That's how people really are. We like sameness and tradition. It gives us a form of stability, you see, in our lives. And when it's disrupted, we start to stampede. When you're stampeded, the big boys at the top, through all the media and entertainment too, can guide the direction of the stampede. and you're in flux. Once you're in flux, you're easily downloaded with new ideas which actually aren't yours, and they'll sound wonderful and so on. Most folk will follow it, and you end up with the planned society that we're now going dead ahead into. So
and
fast.
then, once that planned society has come to fruition, then we're all fluxed.
That's right, we are. Yeah. We're pretty well today, in fact, with the massive outburst of technology. People don't notice each other, even on trains or buses. So much so, just a few weeks ago in San Francisco, I think it was, a gunman got on a coach or a train. They actually have the video of him pulling the gun out, going behind different people's heads, walking down it. No one looked up from their iPads and their phones, and so not a single person. And he shot a person in the back of the head eventually. We're not involved in reality at all. And if you go into the writings of Marshall McLuhan, who predicted this phase would come, where it would simply be voices talking to other voices in the ether without physical contact, it's actually incredibly, it's here. And
Could I ask? Can I ask, from your perspective, when you've seen this apparatus start to be set up, you've seen the deprecation of what it means to be human, you've seen the morality decay, you've seen all of these things happen, you're seeing, literally, like in slow motion, your entire species devolving, and you're actually aware of it. Is that awareness inherently traumatic? And if so, how do you deal with it?
It is traumatic because I had to understand, once I knew what was happening, or understood at least what was happening around me, I had to understand the causes. I looked into previous ages. I realized that big players, like Arnold Toynbee, for instance, in the 1930s at Oxford, who was a globalist and a world socialist. When they say socialist, by the way, they mean an ordered society run by an elite. That's what they mean by that. And he was all for that, and he taught many of the people who went up into world government areas or later United Nations. And he talked about the radical changes that have to make. By the way, that's where all British Commonwealth countries, if you have an NGO, non-governmental organization, after World War II, you would get a grant from the government if you stipulated that you were for radical change. Only if you didn't have a radical change in mind, you would get no grant. And radical meant complete alteration of your culture, even right down to genders, everything, and so on, and destruction of the family unit, etc., etc., etc. So we pay for our own destruction. The average taxpayer hasn't a clue. And I found this out just by going through life. I was in the music business, did a lot of session guitar work, did a lot of solo stuff too in concert, and played with some big bands. And I wrote a lot of songs too and sold them. And they buy everything up, including your copyright, by the way. That's okay. It's understood because you don't know if it's going to be a hit or not. But the fact is, I saw the machinery of the music business. And no one becomes a star without the business, the machinery, taking them over and deciding. No, I mean no one. And if they do someone that can make anybody a star.
I interviewed an artist, and he said that the music business is not about the music. It's about business.
It's about social changing. And in fact, I can remember, it came down to all writers of music. And I worked with some big guys. Who got number ones and so on, and it came down for the writers from the top that you couldn't have any songs from now on with he or she in it, to be gender neutral, and that was in the late 70s. And so these things get implemented into the songs. Most people don't think about it at all, but it's all there. All the messages are there, and then we've seen it plummet right all through the rock era, where lots of guys I knew were musicians, they couldn't get into certain bands because they wanted the gender-neutral look, which was almost effeminate, you know. So they called it heavy metal, with the tight pants on and all the lipstick and so on. So I refused a few live shows, by the way, big world shows. I refused to dress up like that, you know, because I often had to stand in for guys in tours and things like that. So I just said, no way. So that was what they projected to the young, getting you all ready for the present gender-bending society and so on. It was all done years ago. We don't realize that, never mind all the movies you watch that have all the PC stuff in it too and upgrade you. You also get it through a lot of it through the music, until you're down to rap. And you love the little jokes at the top, because rap means you wrap it up, it's ended. That's this bottom. That's what it means. And so now all you have now is women dancing on much music with hardly anything on, with simulated sex, and the youngsters think it's all normal. They all emulate it. If adults on and their mums and dads don't disapprove because they've been contaminated too, and that's a term by the way they use it at the top. The society must become contaminated. Yuri Bezmenov also called it the same term, the ex-KGB guy who defected, with the contamination in the West. Their parents are contaminated, so the children watch it even more so.
That's true. You see on television in New Zealand in 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon when the 5 all the way through to 16-year-olds are coming home from school, turning on the television, and there we have rap videos with strippers simulating sex the entirety of the time. So not only, and I want to get your perspective on this, Alan, not only are we being hypersexualized and gender bent, but also I start to see a sexualization or early sexual indoctrination of children. Do you think this is in preparation for a pedophilia-friendly, elite-controlled future?
Oh, absolutely. Understand, the boys who behind this had been involved down through different centuries prior to this in creating revolutions. Most folk haven't a clue about the revolutions throughout Britain. You remember, too, Britain was one of the first countries that had a revolution. Most will forget that. Every major country that had a revolution for total change to get a small dominant minority to manage its affairs, including all its wealth and money. They always give you red, white, and blue. You had France, the US, and so on, and Britain. So they always give you the same colors, because these are very ancient colors encoding. They go back all the way to Pythagoras. So they give you these little jokes amongst themselves and so on. But they've had so many revolutions, they know how to use them down through the ages. And the reason they bring in the Toynbees and professors of history and philosophies, like Professor Carl Quigley, who taught the State Department of the U.S., and the diplomatic corps on cultures and histories and so on, is so important because they go through history and what worked in the past. How did it get big changes through? If rebellions were in a brew, how do you avert rebellions? All of these things, and the big think tanks take that information and work on it night and day, 24 hours a day. Before they make any particular change, they work out every strategical move like a battle plan. If we do this, how will the public react to that? Certain segments will react A, some B, some C, and some D. Okay, how can we avert it? Okay, and they find ways to avert it, including sometimes putting your heroes out there before they've even made the first move. In other words, when something happens and everyone's complaining about something, oh, who can we talk about? Oh, they'll launch somebody who's got it all there for you. And you jump into it, and they lead you in circles for years. They're voting for this guy and voting for that guy. That's the con that they do. These guys have been at this for centuries.
They've got it down to a fine art.
Yes.
Manipulating human society is something they have almost perfected. What strikes me as very interesting, though, is some of the things that they do backfire to a degree, wouldn't you say?
Sometimes they'll expect all these things, actually, and sometimes just to try, if people are kind of wisening up to something, they'll give you a temporary backfire, but they're going around in a different direction at the same time, which you know what notice was complete. It's like laws struck down, and then they go around in a different fashion, put it through an omnibus bill with a different name, and you get it all the same. They never change their agenda. And I always say that, you know, if you read the big boys' books, and so they tell you the whole future, and they never change the course that they're on. Don't forget, too, that Plato, way back in his day, he talked about human behavior. This is what the philosophers were into. Because the elite at that time had a lot of time to chat about why they were the elite and why all the people down below were the people down below. And he said that if you understand human nature and what worked in the past, He said everything, therefore, is a formula to bring it up to making it work. And so if what's worked with people, and they have gone along with, the people have gone along with in the past, if you use the right formula, you can change them in that direction again, anytime down in the future.
Does that mean if they can send us down a bad path by manipulating us, does that mean we could manipulate ourselves in order to choosing a good path?
You can primarily, if you understand what's happening. Most folk don't, because nothing is put across as being harmful to anybody, even the big changes. In fact, look at the sexual revolution. It's going to be fun, drugs and rock and roll. And everybody at that age went for it because that's when their hormones were screaming, and it was like getting permission from the authorities and adults to go ahead and do it. When youngsters hear adults giving permission in such a way, they do it. So very few people wake up. Plus, you have to remember peer pressure. Peer pressure is counted on in every generation, again, amongst a particular target group. We're all categorized by age and by the big boys' plan, just like marketing, which is heavily involved in all of this too. And Bernays and the guys before Bernays, he didn't get it from Uncle Freud's books. It's old stuff. And they categorize what will work on you at 15 and 20 and 25 and 30 or 40. By the time you're 40, you start to realize you might be mortal. You haven't got the carrot you were promised that you're told to run, and you're not going to get it. And all you look forward to then is working towards your pension. So it's always to use.
We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Alan Watt, Cutting Through the Matrix, is my guest. Oh yeah, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the show that is all about business time. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show, the lighter side of genocide. Because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose a sense of humour, you go friggin' nuts. And my very special guest, who has got so many bright ideas, more bright ideas than a 100-watt light bulb, whose ideas will expose the lies and give you the truth that you were never told. Alan Watt from Cutting Through the Matrix. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. Yeah.
Now, you've had an extraordinary career in music. I didn't know that. And what I find very interesting about creative people is it's very unlikely that they'll actually be a psychopath, like a manipulator or something like that, and also doubly likely that they'll become victims of them who are trying to steal their good frickin' ideas. I'm wondering if you've had any personal experiences with these type of people.
Met lots of the psychopaths who are in the higher management of the music industry. These guys are sharp. They read you before they speak to you, or you speak to them. They read you they know you immediately. And I've seen them go for the young guys. People don't even understand that often they pick the guys out of lineups. They don't even know each other. They make them into a group. They give them a history which didn't exist. And the songs are all written in advance. They'll get them maybe 4 hits, and then they go away. I've seen all that happen. Session guys do all the work on records and albums for them. And that's the way it's managed. It's show business, remember. It's all show business. There's nothing out of show business you can believe. And I've seen these sharks, and they'll get young guys who sign their life away because they'll supply them with drugs. They'll supply them with lots of booze, lots of women, put them up in big hotels, make them feel like they're sucker stars. And it's not till the end, maybe 3 or 4 years, they find out they haven't a penny in the bank that they own. It's all been signed away to other. You only get $3, you know. I think $3 per record if it's an album. Then they have to have breakage fees come off of that. That can be 1/3 to 2/3, because they always include a breakage fee even if you don't have any in it too. And then you've got other cuts come off until you're left with almost nothing. The guys who manage you and their cohorts that they work in the machinery of the entertainment business, they get most of the loot, you know. It's only a few guys that have been on the go for a long time once their contracts are up, if they can last that long and not kill themselves, that eventually get their own contract with their own lawyers for the next round or go around. Like the Rolling Stones did that, in fact. So that's how it's done. But these guys are psychopaths. They could charm anybody, make you believe that you're the best, biggest thing in the world, play on the egos of the young, and when you've got all the women furnished to you, all the drugs, all the booze, the big cars, if nothing is in your name, of course, they'll start to believe it, and they're used. I mean, completely used. Then run out and thrown away.
Is that part of a programming for our culture? Because I see now a lot of young former child stars that were kind of beacons of kind of hope and morality, you know, like the early Britney Spears and Katy Perry and so on and so forth. Then they get turned into these almost celebrity super whores overnight for some reason. And as a result, you see all of these very good, clean-cut little girls and whatever who look up to these young women almost overnight themselves foresee a change in their own life and their own morality standard.
Yeah, and don't forget, too, it's not just the music industry. It works with the fashion industry, the magazine industries, which, again, are heavily into changing culture. Bernays said it, too, you know, to change society. And he got it from an old idea. It goes way back thousands of years, actually. But he said that you always aim at the woman, young female, because they're more able to more willing, actually, to try something new, anything, experiment something new. As opposed to men who tend to be more conservative or staid in their ways. So you do it through the women. And so back in about the 70s, they had about 90% magazines on the shelves, all aimed at women from all ages. Then you had all the specialists in those magazines telling them how to have their sex life, how affairs are good for you, what to do with your life, should you break up, should you have divorce. All these things were and women lapped that up and believed it. And now you have the Oprahs, etc., simply to take it over from there. These are all put out there, these strong people.
Also, at the same time, I believe one of the leading feminist magazines in the 70s was directly financed by the CIA. And going back to what you said about going after the women, I think it might have been the Romans that said, if you want to control the men, you need to control the women. And if you want to control the women, threaten the children.
That's correct. What they did in ancient Greece, too, and in Rome, because remember, the aristocracy of Greece actually moved to Rome. They owned all the money, and they created Rome, and still ran the money system. But what they said was that they had to... if the guys were refusing to work or working slow, the slaves and so on, they told the women not to have intercourse with them at all. No sex, etc. And so a primary drive was cut off until they complied with their bosses or their managers or their owners, and then they would comply again. They did the same thing, by the way, in so-called democratic Britain and other places during miners' strikes in the 1950s. The government told them, the women, if you want money and the bread on the table, you tell your men to get back to work and just refuse them all their comforts, is that. This has been used down through history. They're all formulas and techniques, which are never forgotten or always taught to special folk in every generation. So this is old stuff. Adolf Hitler said we'll bring in a form of totalitarianism because he says democracy will never work. And I understand what he meant by that, to really go into the writings of those who supposedly created democracy, which is a cover. But Adolf Hitler said, aim all the propaganda at the women because they want safety and security. Go over the head of the husband, who's a provider and who's normally the strong figure, until the country, those who lead the country are the strong figures, which is himself. So he says she will follow and therefore must follow the child. And so therefore must follow the husband. And so these are old techniques used down through the ages that people don't know.
What I see now happening in the New Zealand Parliament, at least, is a perforation of these very masculine women who come in and you expect them to be sort of the mother and nurturer, but what they're actually really there for is to instill these very ruthless policies that destroy family units, all the while saying, I used to be a single mother who benefited from this system of social catch nets and everything that we've got, and now I'm going to delete everybody's social catch net.
That's right. Well, also remember, don't forget that Lord Bertrand Russell, who was given charge of the Macy group that came in from Europe, Eleanor fled from Hitler, in fact, and set up in the U.S., and he was also put into the Vienna school that also came over, and you had the Frankfurt school. He was working with these globalists to create a brand new culture for the world, and he was given authority by the President of the United States, because those who fled Germany and all those countries, claimed that they were afraid that the West, especially America, would become fascist or Nazi itself. So they were given complete coverage to do whatever they wanted to do, and they went to work. These boys flooded in from Eastern Europe and all through universities right through the 60s, and then they fomented for revolution in the 60s, and that's when it all broke out in the U.S. especially.
And now what you see is that same sort of scheme. Like you'll see a number of think tanks, groups, non-governmental organisations, and they all wind up at some point down the chain have some form of connection. And I've come up with this theory. I'd like to get your take on it probably after the break. You know, the fractal universe theory, it's all a hologram, and everything that you look into, you see the same pattern repeating. Well, I've come to see all of this negativity and all of this lies, deception, enslavement of the human race as a form of scumbaggery. And with each form of scumbaggery, you tend to look into it, one particular scumbag, one particular instance of scumbaggery. Then the closer you look, the pattern starts to repeat, and you see even more scumbaggery branching off to the sides in an infinitely repeating pattern. I called it fractal scumbaggery. And that seems to be the nature of our very reality today, to me.
It is, but also the boys in the 20th century especially who carried this movement forward from previous generations and centuries, they got in the top scientists, you see. Science was to replace all gods, basically. And from a secular humanism was to get promoted by the United Nations. That all happened as well. And they said that eventually, and Bertrand Russell said this, Lord Bertrand Russell, he said eventually the public will be unable to do anything, even change, he called it nappies, a diaper for a baby, without the expert advice from a professional. That's happened in my lifetime.
It seems to be growing in speed, size, and scope, and it makes people very worried that if they don't fight back very, very soon in order to expose what is happening and to teach people the real truth about how the world is really run, we may not get another shot at overthrowing them, because this could be possibly the worst, most overarching, most incredible scheme of control, global control, ever thought out and implemented. So instead of the normal, we beat them, they beat us, and they beat us again, and so on and so forth, it might just be them winning forever. So it's best a good idea to fight, I think. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, of Alan Watt. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show. On AmericanFreedomRadio.com, 5 days a week, you can listen to the soothing sounds of researchers, doctors, and authors, radio show hosts, artists, bloggers, journalists, researchers of all makes and models and political stripes right here on the Vinnie Eastwood Show. If you want me to interview somebody, you merely need to suggest their name and find me their website or contact details or something of that nature, and I will try and get them. Without fear or favour, if you come on the air with me, I am here to make sure that it is fun, that you get to express your ideas, that you don't get interjected and interrupted. You know, this is kind of like taking a radio holiday, if you will, because we all do things very, very seriously. I know the information's important, but sometimes you do just want to take a wee bit of a holiday. So you drink a cocktail and you listen to the Vinnie Eastwood Show, have a few laughs, and enjoy the listening to really good information from incredible people. Like my very special guest from Cutting Through the Matrix, Alan Watt. Welcome back.
That's a pleasure, yeah.
How long have you been doing your radio show?
That one, I think 7 years straight, that one, on RBN. Before that, I was on, 98 till about 2004, back in the 6 again with Jackie the True on Sweet Liberty. And I didn't intend to come in onto the radio, actually. I just phoned in and eventually she asked me on, because I went through the ancient histories and techniques and so on of what was happening today. And then she says, why don't you write some books? And I said, well, I haven't even thought about that either. And so I rattled a few off. A series cutting through was called 1, 2, and 3. And you can get that separately or on one volume. And then I followed it up by another book too, on Waiting for the Miracle. And I've got another 3 coming out in the next month or two. So I kind of fell into it. I've fallen into so many things like that too, because even in music, I'd always played music from the age of 15, and I didn't really take what I did so seriously. Even though I was on stage early, a few big shows, and I sort of drifted into it. You could do some session where, yeah, okay, you write this song, yeah, okay. But I traveled across the world and so on, but I still thought it wasn't real work because there was no sweat to it. Understand that was the old British system, and your indoctrination, and so I kind of fell into things, and I learned so much because, especially when going across Europe, I found out from politicians who would invite you back after a concert, so they did some classical stuff too on guitar, and they'd give you a meal and you'd sit at the dinner table, and they'd chat away to you, and they knew that there was a complete amalgamation coming. I mean, they mean total amalgamation and eradication of the national countries under the EU. They knew that back in the 70s. I found that out from a top person who, by the way, left as high up there. I think she was vice prime minister or close to it in Norway. And then she went to the United Nations, which is what usually happens. And she just told me it's a certainty, a matter of fact. And I noticed, too, going through the countries in Europe, they're all passing the same laws from their national governments about the same things at the same time, but never mentioning these were international laws. So I realized we're already under a global governance, and that tied right in with the writings of Professor Carl Quigley and others before him, who belonged to these big institutions who worked on this very agenda. Global governments. Karl Marx mentioned they would amalgamate Europe first into one basic nation. The countries would become provinces, and you'd have a government. And there'd be 3 trading blocks. The Americas would be next. We'll have the NAFTA here, free trade agreement before NAFTA, and it's still amalgamating with the whole of the Americas, by the way. And then we'd be followed by a far eastern Pacific Rim region. For Australia, New Zealand, China would be the major dom of that region. And by the way, the Royal Institute of International Affairs published a book from their meeting, their world meeting, in 1937 in Melbourne, Australia, where they held it that year. And it's a fascinating book. It's a member's copy, I think. And they published it the following year after the meeting. In the back, it has all the attendees, the prime ministers and top honchos from every country involved were all there. The public knew nothing about it. Yet all the top parties of even the communist parties in those countries there too, they were all for world government. Top bankers were present. And the quotes of each statement are all throughout the book. And it says at the beginning, it was financed and paid for by the Rockefeller Foundation, as always, and it went under Chatham House rules, which is Royal Institute for International Affairs, meaning they could tell so much to the public, but not to tell them the greater details of their agendas.
What's interesting, as you're saying this, as you're explaining this kind of paradigm, how you have these people that wind up in positions of power, that wind up going to the UN. That's what happened to our former Prime Minister, Helen Clark. She became Prime Minister here, then she got the 3rd highest paying job at the UN. And then you talked about how laws would be implemented globally, but people wouldn't be told that they're happening on globally. Well, we had this big incident here in New Zealand called the terror raids, where the police blocked off a town. They surveilled like 2,000 people or something like that. It was an absolutely unbelievably huge story. But it happened in 18 different countries at the same time. And then you talk about how the governance of the European Union would be set up, and they knew about this back in the 70s. And then the American governance is going to be set up under NAFTA. And now the Oceania region is being set up through something called the TPPA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And then you talked about how financiers are all connected and at these big meetings that set up and plan and implement this agenda. Well, our current Prime Minister is John Key, who used to work on the board of the Federal Reserve in New York for 2 years as the head of the European bond and derivatives trade. He was actually one of the people who was instrumental in setting up the derivatives trade, which was one of the primary causes of the 2008 financial collapse. The exact same year, by the way, where he was elected in New Zealand to save us from the financial collapse that he helped cause.
Yeah, and you'll find most of them, too, all have worked. They started off with Goldman Sachs. They're the banker to the world.
He was Merrill Lynch.
Of Canada, or Bank of Canada, Mr. Carney just got put in as the head of the Bank of England. So he's moved over to England now. It's musical chair time because we are global. Our clique owns the money supply of the world. They have the rights to print each country's money up and tax it all back from the public. We're just the guarantors for debt. That's all we are. And again, a very old support. Don't forget that Charles Galton Darwin, the descendant of Charles Darwin, he was a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. In his book in the 1950s, he put out The Next Million Years, by the way. He said about the future and how the same elite would rule it and society they'd bring in. Getting back to talking about women looking sometimes masculine, he said we shall alter the hormonal chemistry in the male to make him more passive. And it will have a different effect on the women who become more assertive and aggressive. And sure enough, in the 1960s, in the medical books, it came up for the first time. It suddenly noticed, that didn't happen in evolution, suddenly noticed that women's hips were getting narrower all the time. And that's when they started cesarean sections more often. So physically, we're getting re-engineered back then. And Charles Galton Darwin also says we can put it in their water supply, in their food, or even inject it with them, or inject substances which will alter their hormonal chemistry. This is stuff that you don't get this from a top global player like Charles Galton Darwin, high up there in even the physics world. He also said, too, by the way, we are in the process, and he was talking on behalf of the top elite eugenicists that also have charge of these programs. He said that we are now in the process of creating a new form of slavery, he said. That there's always been slavery in one form or another. We're now in the process of creating a new form of slavery, more sophisticated form of slavery. This is where it all ends up to be. But getting back to that book on the future of the British Empire, it was to be taken over by America after this war that was coming up. He said in 1937 in the book it would be very fortunate if Japan were to attack America and bring them into this war. They knew what was going to happen. He said down the road, he said, we shall build up China to be a main player. And once America is exhausted as the world policeman, China will take over.
This is what's happening today, isn't it? The Chinese hold an enormous amount of US dollars in reserve. They could just dump them, and overnight the entire US economy would be worth virtually nothing. And people would be able to come in and buy up the entirety of the United States for pennies on the dollar, I'd say.
It's actually happening. China's buying big chunks of the U.S. And you already had that happening in parts of Latin America. They're buying land for debt swaps. That was all originated by the World Bank. By the way, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, and the IMF, and the World Trade Organization are all created and run by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, a private organization.
Well, that's interesting, because the Chinese are also buying a large quantity of farmland here in New Zealand as well. What I found interesting is that the argument for private investment and that kind of thing, might make sense. The problem is, nations with criminal bankers at the behest of them are buying up the land of other nations. So when you actually start drawing the borders about who owns what, who controls what, it'll actually get to the point where, there isn't any countries anymore, because corporations own everything, including the governments.
That eventually you have the withering away of the state. And this was picked up by the same organization that you thought were fascist or right-wing that owned all the cash, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So you find this one organization created both systems, ran both systems, still do, by the way, and it all planned. You need the dialectic approach to get change moving. One thing on its own, a culture that's steady, is called stagnant. If you have opposition to that culture, the dialectic, then you can get negotiations, arguments going, and out of that comes resolution or change. And that's how they guide us down through the ages. Yeah.
It's been happening for a long time. Now, that begs another question. Bloodlines. If this agenda has actually been implemented all the way through history, are we talking about a generational sort of family of enslavers that throughout history have existed in the background, or are we talking about a bunch of psychopaths that just figured out what was done in the past in order to control and enslave people and decided they'd give it a go over a longer period of time so that they'd actually be successful where all the rest of the people failed?
Yeah. Well, we've always had, going way back in thousands of years, this problem to do with money, wealth, and again, they say that all wars basically are economical wars for power, for a group to have power. You only had one group allowed to use usury all through the Catholic era for a long time, except for the Knights Templars. And so money is power. You live in a physical world. Money is a substitute for many things, as well as a means of exchange. But those who control not just the issuing of money, but what value it's going to have today, tomorrow, or next year. And these guys do. Then it's a complete con. It's a racket. You can't, one day you get a sack of oats weighing 100 weight for one coin, and next week it could be, I want 5 for it today. But that makes no sense at all. I mean, barter, for instance, was always negotiation between two people for one thing. Today it's out of your hands. The guys who have created the private reserves, the banks for countries, and it's all secret who owns them and so on, the big shareholders, they run the world. And they set up their system because these guys are taught from childhood a completely different history from you. They get access to archives if they've been tested and found not to be a blabbermouth. So all the children, by the way, are tested in the elite groups. And they get a complete overview of how it really is and how it must remain. You'll find even with people like Aldous Huxley talking in his documentaries, if you go into Alan Watt Cutting Through the Matrix archives, you'll hear the Berkeley talk that he gave and the Mike Wallace talks as well. The links were there. You can see the man is thinking in two different methods, one for the public and one from what he knew, what he could say and what he couldn't say. But he warned of it. He said it's not too difficult now for a small scientific elite to take over the whole world's cultures and run it in their own direction to suit themselves. He was talking from experience because he took part in these world meetings with his brother Julian Huxley, who worked for the United Nations. So we're going through, as I say, a very old script. It's intergenerational, no doubt about it. If you go into some of the organizations that sprung up and got into the media, at least they're into books, like the Cecil Rhodes Society for World Revolution, for taking over resources, how they caused the revolutions, how to promote something called democracy, then it's very old indeed. But he also said, too, Cecil Rhodes, in his own writings, his will and so on, he left all his money, by the way, to Lord Rothschild. He said that we'll use techniques and be a form of a secret society, much like the Jesuit system. So they copied the techniques of Jesuitism. And Winston Churchill, at one point during World War II, was out of the loop, actually, because he was a drunk, he was a front man, and all the rest of it, and he could like to yap, and he was kind of out of the loop. And he found something out, and in Parliament, he said, we don't know the name of this organization. Now, different names like Lord Alfred Milner Group, the Round Table Society, different names going around, but no definitive group. He says, I've just found out they exist, he says, and they're right. He says, not only are they behind many of the wars, he said they're also writing the school book histories for the children with a different account, you see. This is no war. And sure enough, that came out with Professor Carl Quigley, who was a personal historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, the American branch. He got into the archives. He took over from Alfred Zimmerman. Alfred Zimmerman, by the way, was the communist leader. And so they don't care about communism. They actually said that in the book, we don't care who we bring in, because they run them all, you see. Dictators, communists, fascists, right-wing. Yep.
See, they pull the wool over the eyes of everybody, even the people that work for them, that know what's going on. It's like there's no loyalty, only betrayal and scumbaggery. I remember Winston Churchill was drunk walking through the streets one night. An old lady said, "Mr. Churchill, you're drunk." And he said, "Yes, madam, but you're ugly, and tomorrow I will be sober." And we'll be right back after the break at theVinnieEastwoodShow.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. My very special guest is Alan Watt, brighter than 100 watts. And he has shed some light, indeed, on some very, very strange scumbaggery. Now, I wanted to turn the conversation, if I might be so forward, towards the elite breeding programs. This is a topic that I've only heard you speak about a couple of times. I haven't been able to research further up on it. But when I say the words elite breeding programs, to the layman, what are they?
Well, basically, you have to go into history again of all cultures. And you'll find that when you come into this thing called civilization, this is the key to it, civilization, which is a system with writing, money, and in some form or another, there's money, which is not easy for the average person to get a hold of in its raw form, like gold, silver, whatever, combined. In other words, the mind expands with education. So you need a leisure class to begin with. So you need a leisure class either at the very beginning by conquering other peoples, living like a king, and then you get advisors who have nothing to do except study, learn, and advise. So that's how it really starts off. You bring in the money with it, and, of course, to maintain their system, they must force everyone else to use their money. This goes way back even to the Spartan Wars that went on for 100 years. The Phoenicians have been taking over country after country, and the Phoenicians have different names down through time. But they were forcing, at that time, their silver standard coin onto other countries. If they didn't accept it, they'd get another country, a powerful one, into debt. Part of paying off the debt was to go to war with the country that wouldn't accept your money. And they also, by the way, in the treaties they made, acquired all their slaves for their mines. They had mines as far as the Ural Mountains, by the way. And they worked it out that the average slave could work, I think, a life would get at least a quarter to a gram of gold, and then they'd die because they went through so many, there's no safety standards in those days. But getting back to the point, they had war after war, and they were taking over the ancient world big time and using other countries to do it and lending themselves to those countries to keep a wealthy elite living in luxury who would always back them. The elite, by the way, always worked with these wealthy merchants and lenders, always right down through the Middle Ages, by the way, and all European countries right up to the present. It was the ordinary peasants that seemed to become a different species to both. And they still talk about this today. Now, power marries money. You don't want a wife who's scrubbing the floors if you're a multi-millionaire with a lot of status and so on. And so a man would marry or get arranged marriage through the priesthoods of all kinds, by the way, in all countries. They'd match up someone with appropriate wealth from a dynasty that had men in it who fought and were generally pretty cruel, tyrants, if you like. And out of that, you'd have another class of children, pretty well like their parents. They'd have the traits of psychopathy in a sense, ruthlessness, determination, incredible greed, and etc. But you also created to take care of this from the money perspective, because you were really on top. The money boys are always on top, as you would supply your advisors. Because the kings and queens never knew a darn thing except their advisors. Today we have the same thing around prime ministers. Prime ministers or any politician, they know nothing any more than the average person in the street about politics until they get into it. Even then, they're made minister of finance, minister of housing. They've been lawyers in some other capacity before, generally. And so they're dependent on the bureaucrats who are specially selected, and they've been there for years. They know, each one knows they write all the scripts up from them, along with the script writers, etc. The script writers who are international now, know the international agenda. They don't. Many of them work in all countries, in fact, or some of the countries, not just the countries that you think they're in. And they're writing the global agenda. They have been for years and years and years. So information is power. You make sure that everything comes out, must come through the script writers. Presidents and prime ministers now have been puppets for 100 years now. That's all they are. They're front men. They take the rotten tomatoes when it's time for them to get them out and get new guys in. And they stick to their scripts. That's what they're told to do. Photo ops, sell them, and fake domestic stories about nice family photographs that they fake up. We don't know them at all. But they play the game, and they're well rewarded for it, for sure. So these are really old techniques, you understand. But money is power. Some people remember in the past, and I talk about arranged families, etc., to make sure your offspring are the same. If you're a Rothschild, you pretty well guarantee your child's going to be a banker, an international banker, a big scale. So you're pretty well secure in that. Whereas most European people, for instance, you'll find, or British people even, the parents don't do high investment in the education of their children. The elite do. They make sure they've got the best education money can buy, special schooling, and they get side schooling as well into the real world, how it really works, by private tuition, private tutors. So getting back to I think it was Lord Bertrand Russell, he said the guy who was given permission to work with all these top groups like the Frankfurt School to change, destroy culture, bring in a new global society, he said that eventually the ruling elite, and I think he actually meant it was already there, that's the way he said it, he said will become a separate species from the rest. I think that's happened. It's been here for a long time like this. So we're given one reality. We grow up trying to get by. We think with like good education. We run for the carrot when we leave school or college or whatever. And you find you're not going to get it because things don't work that way. The psychopathic types run up the ladder. They're noticed by the big organizations. They pluck them out and use them. And that's how it's really always been, unfortunately, in a monetary system where money is the reward. Money gives you security. Because we all have fear of things, same things. Poverty, no shelter, no clothing, no heat, no food, sickness without friends. With money buys all of that. So all your basic fears are gone. Now, you can imagine being born to a family where you've never had even the thought of those basic problems. They have a completely different overview of themselves, their families, the world, how it really runs. And your mind can really expand when all these wars, or all these worries have gone from you. You don't have them anymore. They don't care about who they're going to get matched up with, by the way, for weddings. As long as they have the child as an offspring, the guy can have his little affairs on the side, so can the woman, by the way, as long as she doesn't have a child by someone unauthorized outside marriage. That's why that you've always had royal abortionists right to the present time, by the way. Not just for the main royalty, but all the cousins and queens, because they all have titles to the throne. If someone would die, they all have the royal abortionists go around and take care of all the little problems they have. That's in all cultures as well. So today you have an international elite. They've seated themselves around the world for a long time. They run China. They run all the countries. Don't think that China is taking over this country or that country. China is also financed by the same financiers who also run all their bookkeeping systems for them and management systems because the Chinese didn't know how to do it at all. And under the guise of, it's China, it's a nation that is buying this, there are big private corporations, international corporations who are really behind it and who own the big plants and so on in China, just as happened in the Soviet Union, see that way to say.
I see no difference. And why don't people wake up to this? Well, because they've still got those same brilliant techniques of making sure that you're educated to believe contrary to anything that is the truth.
They've done many studies. I've read them on the air, in fact, when they came out of Harvard or wherever, and they found out that the higher education that you have, especially if you come from a higher middle-class family, you want the peer pressure to belong to the status group you are in. The higher you are, overcomes any thinking against the negative or the negativity you see against your own indoctrination. So they're the least people to ever look at the truth or at least question it. You also find much want to belong. The greatest shame for them is to be tossed out or ignored from that particular peer group. In fact, again, Lord Bertrand Russell said, and this is where I fell into a lot of things, he said, the brightest children, even from the schools from the proles, you might say, he said, we can pick some of them out, the promise, through testing. It's all fit into a centralized system. And this is way back in the 30s and 40s. And he said, the brightest of them must be recruited and taken from their background and their family, so their culture is forgotten, brought into the hallowed halls of Eton or Cambridge or somewhere. And he said, and become one of us and do our bidding and really approve, but never have contact with where he came from and so on. He said, if such a child exists with has ability to figure such a thing out, he may become a spokesperson with the gifts and abilities in the future that will go against us. Therefore, he said, we must eliminate him. That's his own book, by the way.
So let me get this straight. They want the best and the brightest to work for them, but not bright enough so that they can figure out who they're really working for.
Oh, never that. In fact, even the Royal Institute for International Affairs has an outer party and an inner party. That's what George Orwell was talking about in his book, 1984. And Professor Carl Quigley goes through this. The outer party is all built on faith. You'll get up a ladder. You're told that the system is good, and never ask any questions from a superior. If you don't understand something, simply obey. Very much like Freemasonry, in fact. And you find that the upper party belongs to All Souls College for life in Oxford. That's called the inner party. And Lord Alfred Milner planned the Boer Wars and the Rhodesian Wars and the takeovers. He also planned for many years in the late 1800s for World War I there too. And quickly remember, he's their personal historian. He said that they've been behind all the wars in the 20th century and still the ones to come. So he said it was time that the public knew this, and he actually thought the public were so dumbed down by then and would accept being run by experts and authoritarians that he said it was time the public would publish this. But he was mistaken, because they published his books and they broke his place when they realized he said too much.
Have you
established a fantastic book to read. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Have any of these people actually been brought to justice before? I mean, if let's say a member of a large, very highly involved family being exposed for some sort of crime, and the family being shunned in the media or something of that nature.
The only one you've actually had was King Edward abdicated in England and married the American woman, multimillionaires. It wasn't just because of her, actually. That was a good cover story and so on. It's because he had shared ideas with Germany, and at least the ideas of the world was being taken over by what he called communist revolutionaries, which were working for a much higher power. The top communist revolutionaries, by the way, way above Lenin and all the guys who planned it all and so on, are all multimillionaires right into the present day. Or billionaires, multi-billionaires, maybe even more. So that's why he got out. And in a way it was being shunned, but a deal was struck. If he'd said any more, he'd have had an accident.
Accidents happen more often than not, I've found.
There's no doubt about that, yeah. No doubt whatsoever about that. I mean, when Bill Clinton was in, people were dying all around him.
Really?
Oh, yeah. People were dying all around, even found in the ground dead and so on. And Bill Clinton was put in by the big boys. I mean, Arkansas was famous for the drugs getting brought in and by the plane loads, and he was in that deal when he was the governor. Many good videos have been put out there in exposés about it, investigations. Not conspiracy stuff, it's validated fact. And they put the right man in the job. You know, he would do what he was told. He enjoyed the role playing. He was a good psychopath, definitely a good psychopath, absolutely. Could lie to the public without a blink, you know. had no conscience whatsoever, but and a bit of an actor. All psychopaths are a bit of an actor. In fact, the best ones are awfully charming, incredibly charming, and that's their gift. It's a gift that they have because they don't feel the same emotions, but they watch and study other people's emotions in different situations, so they know how to put it on and really put it on too lavishly.
It's kind of like you're dealing with a creature that only sees through, let's say, a beam of light. And so what you do, in order to ensure that that creature can't even see you, is you put a mirror in front of you. And every time the creature moves its head, you move the mirror with it. All that creature starts to see is the mirror. You use itself to deceive itself. Then you get to use the creature for whatever means you want. You're a human being. You're the creature. They're the one with the mirror.
As I say, in the different businesses and so on. And they're awfully good. And I've seen them work on people. And that person will tell you, it's as though when you were voicing your concerns to them, you felt like you were the only person in the world, and this person's complete attention was all about you and around you. That's how you come away from them, the experience with them. And they are like different creatures, actually. The manipulative psychopath is incredible. And that's an awful gift they have. They don't have to sit and work out a plan to work on you. They read you almost by telepathy, you might say. I'm kind of joking there, but maybe not. Who knows? But they can read you and all your body gestures or anything in your face at all. Like a book, they know you.
Which is why they're so good at swiping your ideas, starting defamation campaigns, and destroying people's lives to protect themselves from exposure. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Is now the final segment. Displeasing as it might be for me. I think it's been like nearly 2 years trying to get you on the show, Alan. You've been a very, very busy man.
I had to. On RBN, I was doing a one-man band, basically. And you get to cover the whole world's news. I get 500 links a day. And I'd start early in the morning. I'd rush through the whole day, pretty well stuck to the chair, right through into the show, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, and finishing at 9. And then, after it was broadcast, I'd also upload it to my site, so to cut out the commercials and so on. I'd get to bed and upload that by satellite, slow. So I get to bed at 2 in the morning after I was finished. So I'd eventually cut out all other shows, and I've got hundreds of guest shows that I shelved, but I've gone back to them now. And this way I'll have more time to finish off the things I should be doing anyway, because you can read the daily news. It simply reinforces everything you already know. The agenda is well underway. We're already completely global. Society is now brought to a stage where a lot of it, and more so in other countries than in some countries and others, is completely dysfunctional. The big boys can then point round, which they're doing under the guise and the use of anti-terrorism too everywhere. But they point out you have murder, mayhem, rape, pillage, and plunder all over the place in some countries. You can't handle yourself. You need an authoritative system. I've been saying this for years. I'm glad mainstream talk show hosts have caught on to that and using it all. And this falls right into the system because the Club of Rome, which is one of the top think tanks for the big boys, came out in the 1970s with a book on the future and the plan for the United Nations and the world and the World Bank and so on. And they said that democracy would never work. Now, they knew that before they gave us the term democracy. And I think it's always been here, but it hasn't. Up to World War I, the average man in Britain didn't have the vote, by the way. Never mind women. He didn't have the vote if he didn't own property. And even then, what you do, they give you the guys to vote for. You don't know them. You'll never meet them. They belong to a party. Then they said, we can't represent you. Well, they can't do what our constituents want. I have to go with the party. So what's the point in having one? But again, the Club of Rome said, therefore, because there's so many conflicting and competing special interest groups today, and they made sure we got them all, by the way, they said democracy would never work. Therefore, we have to train the public into an authoritarian system. And that's what you've been trained with today, and especially with the use of anti-terrorism and so on. You're noticing just authoritative measures being rolled out like crazy, and the people are adapting. Like Darwin said, that to survive, you adapt. Most folk adapt without even consciously thinking through things. They just simply accept them. And we've already adapted through all the airport ridiculousness, nonsense, traveling and all that. That's all normal now. Everything is weird. Objective becomes normalized quite quickly. And everyone, by the way, in a totalitarian type system, which this must be, an authoritative system under the Club of Rome's rules, the United Nations rules, and so on, everyone must be completely predictable. And that means complete data collection daily. And they have it all now. It's all here.
It's like we're reacting. Is it a Pavlovian response, stimulus and then action?
That's partly it, too. You can do the most drastic things to societies with the most pleasant face, or the most reasonable sounding, if it's marketed properly to you, reasons for doing it. And we adapt to that, too. Fear is a fantastic method of taking all rights away. Every tyrant in Rome used that. We've got to protect you. And then you end up getting searched and groped and all the rest of it at airports. So, people will give up pretty well everything. And by the way, after 9/11, that was the first thing all major media and newscasters were doing. Going around the streets, selecting certain people. They only get the selected ones that they want shown on television. Are you willing to give up your freedom for security? The oldest thing in the book is we're doing all these world surveys, and most folk go, oh, yeah, okay, So here you are.
Your
What
freedom.
can you do? You're locked in. So adapt to it. Stick your heads up. It is true that some people can understand this optimistic part. If we all just stop going to work tomorrow, if we all just stop for a week using gasoline, you see the prices plummet, for instance. And the big boys would have to turn around and take note of you and say, what on earth do you want? But you can never, and they know this too, you can never get the public to come together for something major together. It doesn't happen. You find that with unions too. You get the scabs going through and breaking it. You'll never get the public. They count on that. In fact, they sow the dissension amongst the people decision-making time. This is old art, very, very well understood and used.
What if your entire campaign was predicated upon explaining the system that they're going to discredit and derail you with, so that any attempt to discredit or derail you is something everybody can easily identify and ignore? That's the education element. Imagine, Alan, if the whole world had listened to your radio show for a couple of years.
Yeah. You see, here's the thing again. The big boys don't sit back and let anything happen by itself. They give you the heroes to follow, by the way, down through history. And they make sure that there's someone to speak for you. Just like a politician, that's all he is, someone they put in front of, pretending to speak for you. Same thing. He says, talks the language, you understand that he's my guy. And that's how it works. So they understand human nature perfectly well. Again, Orwell put that out in his book, 1984, where Winston, the guy, is set up by the very guy who ends up torturing him to join a resistance movement. And they've been at it forever. And power must be maintained. It's maintained by fear and finding out who is questioning the system. And they give you the leads to follow. You follow the leads. You join the agencies, or you think you're joining some rebellious movement, and in fact, you're being led up the garden path by. They don't let things happen. The world is so well infiltrated by thousands of people. Now you have all the data collection characters. People can't talk on the phone, today. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them. It doesn't matter how many shows I've listened to. They can't talk on the phone to you if they phone you or email you without saying things that perhaps they shouldn't say. It's personal detail. They don't think, oh, it's not happening to me. Yeah, it's happening to everybody, folks. We've all profiled. We've all got virtual. The Pentagon, and I read the article on there, they have a virtual everybody in a computer at the Pentagon. They collect the data daily from all your Facebook, your emails, your chats, everything, and your phone calls, and they add that daily to the virtual you. They then run programs on the virtual you to see how you'd respond in different situations. And they say it's pretty well 100% accurate. That's how it'll work in real life. Everyone's pegged.
Does this mean the situation is hopeless?
It's almost hopeless. What you used to have, see, once culture, something to hold, that's why people used to have rebellions in the past. It wasn't for a revolution, for something new. Rebellions are protesting a sudden change in custom, and the king would put more tax out in a direction or something, and you'd rebel against that if you want to go back to the way it was. That's what rebellions are. But even for a rebellion, you needed a common culture. Common cultures are pretty well, for most folk, not for all, have been destroyed. And so you don't have as much in common with people next door as you thought you might have, in fact. At one time, H.G. Wells said it, and different ones said it too. They got to destroy the family unit. Marx said it as well, and so did Lenin. And so, by the way, did Albert Pike and many others. Destroy the family unit, because in the past, the average guy and woman would be married at one time. They'd have children. That was the purpose of it all. The perpetuity of the species and all that. And you'd have things in common with all those around you. And when things were going to hit the family, for instance, they'd all stand together in masses. And that's what came against local councils and national governments and so on. That's when you had that kind of commonality. When you destroy the commonality, you can't get that kind of support from people to stay together for something that's going to help them.
Is that why they always kill the people that tell everybody to live together in peace and harmony?
That's correct. And then they'll also tell you, absolutely, I mean, don't forget there's a double speak here that works awfully well as part of the technique. Many folks think the United Nations is a wonderful organization. They don't realize the United Nations ran the Cold War. It was a referee between the NATO countries, which they drafted the charter up for, and that's their military wing, and the Warsaw Pact countries. Neither side could do anything to the other without the UN permission. It ran both sides. It was all fake.
It's all a very rational plan if you're a completely insane psychopath. Wouldn't you agree? Suddenly, the world being crazy doesn't seem so crazy at all. It's just a world being run by crazy people, actually. Everybody else, like you and me, we might be just as sane as anybody that could ever be qualified as sane as a spectrum of normality. But at the end of the day, it ain't us that really make all the decisions. It ain't us that kill all the good people in society. It's them. And they must be exposed. There must be a glimmer of hope. Alan Watt, thank you so much for your time. I hope we'll do it again in another 2 years. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. Cutting Through the Matrix. Thank you very much. We'll see you again sometime.
No matter where you live, globalism affects you. Did you know that the Vinnie Eastwood Show has more subscribers than New Zealand Herald TV and is New Zealand's most popular YouTube news channel, where warm-hearted humour and a list of awesome guests talk about crucial issues which the mainstream media ignore? A show where you, the listener, can phone up with questions, comments and suggestions of guests. Vinnie is building a hub to connect truthers with raw information they need to become active. He can help you gain further skills such as website building, producing audio and video, and creating revenue streams in your own multimedia environment. Because Vinnie supports such a wide range of people in the truth movement, he is not government or corporate backed and relies entirely on your donations. Give now, give generously, or subscribe for $10 a month for access to ad-free video archives. Just visit thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and click donate.